Cool. Hi everyone. So these are the sessions that me and other people will be taking up on our walk up to the GI. Expect certain amount of matter coming from this session. Expect certain amount of guidance coming from this session. But what you shouldn't expect is an extensive amount of spoon feeding that will happen. That you is like a lot of people think happens in matter sessions. But I won't be explicitly giving you everything that you need to know about economics. Uh, but before that, there'll be like a bit of briefing and as to how to prepare each and every theme, but regarding everything. But specifically, I'll be explaining what to read about in economics, what to not read about in economics. Where usually in debates it becomes a unique point that people lack in understanding the economic part of this entire debate structure and things along the same line. Okay. So starting with firstly, so like excuse me if I like look like lost something because I'll be reading from certain parts that I have taken notes of. I have my notes that I'll be using for this. So mostly who this session is for. So don't think that specifically if you're like a very beginner into debating that it's very like that it's like stop like it's extensively, how do I say, hectic for you. It's not that way. I'll be extremely light on what we should be discussing. I won't go into extensive deep depth of everything or every concept. What I expect from you all to do in this session is to specifically, after the session is over, I'll be telling you a lot of topics to read upon. Go ahead, open your browser, like go ahead and read about everything. You don't necessarily have to read upon everything in depth. Remember, in debating you don't have to attain graduate level knowledge on everything that you do, which means that if you're studying economics you don't need to be like an economics graduate or anybody who has done like at least extensively good in economics to understand this part. Like for most parts, like I'm pretty trash at economics, but like it takes a lot of time, like it takes some time for you to like go about certain basics and you're good to go. It doesn't mean that you need to be very thorough or very clear with everything that happens, so it's fine. Secondly, towards the end, if there are certain topics which I run around on, I mean, like I usually get distracted and like I start explaining things which may not be really like relevant to this debate, to this session. So just like unmute yourself and ask me like if there is any kind of question or any kind of confusion that comes around during this session. And most importantly, let's start low. So most importantly, what this debate is going, what this session is going to necessarily be about, it's mostly around the idea of what is this texting, guys. Okay, wait. Cool. So what is this session is going to be about? So this session is mostly covering economics in general. Look, economics in and of itself is far too big for me to session for every to cover everything in this session. Like you have micro macro, which I'll be like coupling up in one session. You have developmental economics, international trade related economics, what kind of like trade causes what kind of country to proceed, what is the necessary requirements for a country to be more developed in the sense. So there are a lot of debates that arise around the same ideas. Thirdly is the idea of finance. In general sense, finance is necessary because a lot of debates that come within these like normal debate, the normal debating like how do I say, normal tournaments, which are like not very, how do I say, not coded by a lot of very big debaters. They give very basic notions regarding what finance looks like. Finance usually includes the stock market. Finance basically includes how business strategies work. It's mostly around the idea of what like startup culture is, what how startups work, what is stocks, what is share markets, and things around the same idea. One of the common phenomena that we see when regarding finance debates is the idea of buyback of shares. How is necessary? Like you have to end up debating both sides of it. So let's start up with a bit of basics before we go into anything in depth. Firstly, wait, yeah, I'm still getting people to join in. It's pretty distracting. Are we there making you the host?
Yeah, do
Please,
that.
please.
I'll admit whoever comes.
Yeah, so it gets a bit distracting towards the end.
Yeah.
Hmm. Cool. Right. So on the outside, I think the vast majority of this session is going to help you in preparing for the GI. What's reading up? So what's has been problematic so far in our debating circle is nobody tells anybody what to read from, what are the sources that you need to understand, what are the topics that you need to read upon. If somebody tells you economics, it's not R.S. Agarwal ka like 15 pages that you're going to like get useful for debating in and of itself. So you need to just go beyond certain structures, like beyond certain norms, and you have to read a bit more. Second part is preparing a matter file. Matter file is something that becomes very relevant once you start debating a lot, because not everything that you will read, not everything that you will ever come across is something that you will like immediately grasp, or like is going or you're going to remember for a very long period of time, assuming 1 or 2 years that you're going to debate. So what's really helpful with matter files is that you have a consistent account of what things you've read, what things you've not read. There are certain metrics of preparing a matter file, how to arrange them. This is something that I'll be doing towards the end of this session. So it's far easier for you if you have a matter file in Google Docs. So you're able to keep track of what you've learned, what you've not learned. If there is a motion which comes up regarding that very specific issue, so it's far fast, like it's pretty fast for like pretty convenient for a lot of individuals to just open up that matter file and read through it. Remember, during GI or during every other thing or every other debating that you'll ever do post GI, reading online or reading through internet is highly unrecommended, because if you get caught, a lot of people just end up like informing the ad score and all these places, and there's a lot of nuisance that ensues. So it's preferred for people to not necessarily engage in that. But the point wherein matter files becomes an exception is that you already have a certain amount of group of websites. You have noted down certain amount of arguments that you will argue if this comes up. So it's not something which remains in the restricted area. So don't think that revision is something which is extensively limited to the idea of preparing for your academics. Revision to a certain extent, or at least skimming on certain topics, is becomes a better part of like debating in general. So one like how do I say one TLDR on debating, towards the end you'll realize that debating to a certain extent is also an economic like is also an academic endeavor at core, which means that it's not just about like speaking 7 minutes. You need to read about a lot of things. So does it help becoming good at certain topics? How do you decide that? A lot of individuals have certain tendencies towards thinking that certain things are extensively good for them. So I think economics is something that I've found, and international relations something that I've found like deeply is something that I like really feel like learning a lot. So I end up researching a lot in them. Is it important for you to run around in every theme and become a master of all themes? No, it's not necessary. You have to take up 1 or 2 themes that you think that you can do very good and like read extensively through it. That at the same time does not mean that you at no point in time go ahead and read nothing related to other themes. It's about having an in-depth knowledge and having an intermediate knowledge of everything. To become a good debater, you need to have an intermediate knowledge of everything and anything that comes up in the world, or everything and anything that exists. So on this point, we start this session. So as a part of beginners prep, what becomes very crucial is that you don't know what are the relevant things that are going to come in debates. So you don't really understand what part of economics is something that is going to help me debate wise. So one of the most important part of these kinds of preparation is that you divide your entire debating into several themes. So one of the most common themes that comes about is feminism, or if people call it like social justice debates. You basically talk about minority communities. In that, you talk about how like like ethnic minorities, religious minorities, gender minorities, things along the same lines. So social justice debates are fairly common. If somebody feels that they are extensively tending towards social justice movements, so they should like in-depth read about it. It's not just limited to debating. All this knowledge will come handy once you are outside debating as well. So how do you do it? So I'll be sharing certain amount of motion banks regarding what should be done, what should not be done. So these are the common motions that come regarding that same theme. Take up a motion, do a do a gov and do a op through reading online. Before you go ahead and you make those motions yourself, things such as, okay, I'll take 15 minutes to myself and I'll write everything that I can think about it. Before doing that, take up that motion, read 15 minutes for on government side, what do you think can be argued, make a small list of argumentation online on your sheet, on your doc, like in whichever way you guys prefer. Think what how this can be done, and then do it the same for the op. So how it really helps you in this sense is that a lot of argumentation and a lot of context with relating to debating is overlapping in itself, which means that you don't need to know nuanced and obscure ideas in depth. It's more about knowing the common knowledges, like having common knowledge, how does free will work, what is free choice, how does oppression work, what are the characteristics of what makes oppression problematic, what do we understand by competition, is it helpful in a lot of situations, is competition good, is competition bad, and then it all comes down to your creativity, how and where can you put these ideas and how can you manifest them into brilliant motions. So you don't really need to do a lot of in specific things. It's about you knowing that does free choice really exist. If some side claims that there is free choice on their side of the house, how can you tackle it? Can you really prove to me that there was an, how do I say, an understanding on part of the actor who was making that free choice? Was there a complete dissemination of information to them for them to make that choice? So these are the basic things that you need to do. So similarly, in every theme, you'll come across certain common ideas. So when you do motion filing, as I've said already, you'll get to know and you'll get strengthened on those core principles or those core ideas of that specific theme. If you guys want a theme-wise breakdown towards the end of this session, I think like post this session, I have a list which will necessarily tell you like what kinds of themes there are and like what are the sub parts of those themes. But for general, like you'll do that, you'll understand how to go about it towards the end of the session. And since we're done with theme development, motion banks, and all that jazz, let's dive straight into economics. So economics, there are several layers on how you can read about certain themes. Like me personally, like after a certain point in time, when you have done a lot of like online reading and you're done with like if you've done decent amount of online, like how do I say, motion prep, you get to know ki, like there are certain ideological blocks that you or knowledge blocks that you usually encounter. Okay, this is something that I don't know of, so what is the probability that I'll ever debate about it? So this is what this session is going to do. You're going to like break through and understand why this knowledge box has to be filled, so it helps you or like equips you with the basic tools to debate those motions. Common sources are internet websites. Common sources are books. There are 4 books that I would generally prefer. 3 of them I have read personally, so I would say like these are extensively good. First is Developmental Economics. This is written by Sunanda Sen. Sunanda Sen is like one of the DU professors on economics, like brilliant professor. It's basically going to help you on how international trade and economics has basically helped the entire nation or like global worldwide. What's the role of World Bank, WTO in developing certain economies? Does it help? Does it not help? Is there an existence of neoliberal economics, which is true? A lot of countries think that taking simply loans from World Bank or IMF is something going to help their country. Is there a validity of like what is the truth check mechanism of this specific idea? Is it true that if you take more loans from IMF, it's far better than taking loans from Chinese banks? What is the reality that lies within it? So these kind of ideas are something that you're going to explore within this book. This book gets a bit of, how do I say, academic in nature, so it's not that tough, but yes. Secondly is Good Economics for Hard Times. This is like the classic Abhijit Banerjee book. It's extensively good if you're willing or if you're expecting to read on policy economics, things such as how does self-exposing discrimination works, like merely putting individuals who are from minority communities within workspaces which have majorities working in them, things such as working in a mall or a Walmart wherein you are a minority worker and a lot of people working there are white, and the manager who's specifically managing you is a white supremacist, or even if not a white supremacist, is a normal white individual. Does that derogate that individual's position or ability to or capability of work? This is something when you remind these individuals that they belong to minority communities, there is certain amount of deterioration in their performances in and of itself. Ideas such as these, which become extensively important when you're developing nuance on certain arguments, becomes useful because you don't really always understand, okay, discrimination may not be just overt in nature. There are other ways of propagating discrimination itself. So just to open up your understanding of what are the variations of how things could exist, things such as universal basic income, is it really helping individuals? Is it not helping individuals? Ideas such as if immigration really exists, like immigration is something which is a contested topic in a lot of debates and a lot of political spectrum debates as well. People think that the existence of immigrants within your own land is something which is basically going to derogate the economic structure of their country, which just because they are freeloaders within an economy, is it really going to like crash your economy or like create recession or things along the same lines? How politics works around the same lines? These are the kinds of questions you get answered in this book. Thirdly is the book of Three Pillars. This is Raghuram Rajan's book. this book basically talks about how community and development are two different are was supposed to be an interlinked factor within a country, but the kind of development that India has seen and a lot of sectors of developing world has seen, they have become two distinguishable actors, which is to say that a lot of countries think that consistently bringing in competition and consistently developing a lot of underdeveloped areas is merely going to lead certain amount of economic booms or these countries becoming better. That's not something which is necessarily true, even if it looks on the surface of it that it's true. We'll explore in this book why is it explicitly untrue, why a lot of communities still suffer even if there is JP Morgan Bank within your own city. So what are the topics that I'll be covering for today? So a
So,
lot part of
could you please repeat the names of the three books again?
okay, just a second. So firstly is Developmental Economics by Sunanda Sen. Second is yours. What is this? Yeah, Good Economics for Hard Times by Abhijit Banerjee. And third is Three Pillars by Raghuram Rajan. And fourth is like free economics. Okay, so free economics is something that's like widely recommended by a lot of people to read, but I'd suggest personally against it because free economics is very obscure economics. It's like it's not really going to help you a lot. Like one of the examples of free economics is this. So assuming that there is a price of an item which is discounted and there is a price of an item which is extensively discounted, which means that if you're making a mixer grinder which is worth 2000 rupees and vast amount of competition or like vast amount of companies within those market is selling it for 2500 rupees, 500 rupees of profit. If suddenly there comes a competitor who prices it at 1900 rupees, everybody knows that the production cost of this everybody knows that the production cost of this cannot be 1900, and everybody thinks that there is a chance of fraud existing on part of this company, that it's extensively low. One of the common metrics of these phenomena is has Freedom 251 phone that came about. There is a sense of like there's a sense of doubt that prevails public that prevents them from buying into that very objective, buying into that very product, even if that product had certain amount of economically good policies, things such as not quantity but more in the longer run, like in the sense that they're going to win it, like how Freedom 25 251 phones work is that there are a lot of biddings that happen. So those biddings are actually going to help you gain extensive amount of okay, I forgot OP India economic analysis. Um, yeah, I mean, like, I'm not addressing this right now. Okay, but yeah, I'm not saying that OP India is something that you guys should read at least for economic analysis. Like, it's bad. So, yeah, on the same idea
Don't read
regarding
it in general. I'm just saying don't read it in general.
road patty, you don't get to like trash on people who are like right now willing to read.
Sorry, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, no, doesn't
My
work
bad.
this session. Yeah. Cool. So regarding that same idea, prefer and stick to the. Oh, okay, yeah. So Freedom 251 was basically an economic scheme wherein through bidding you are actually able to accumulate extensive amount of capital to actually sell those 250 rupees worth of phones. But just because people didn't understand that those economic policies or those economic nuances of selling 251 phones, people thought that it's more or less likely a fraud. So these kinds of ideologies, these kinds of policies, what kind of public behavior does it ensue? Behavior in general becomes a vast part of how economics is perceived. So if you really want to engage in obscure economics and behavioral economics, I would suggest that economics is the book to go. So yeah, take up your pens. This is the part where I'll be like putting in a lot of topics what you need to read about. So what I'll be doing is that I won't be explicitly telling you everything and anything that is there under the sun regarding economics, but what I'll be telling you is what are the major debates that happen around economics, what you need to read about. I'll tell you one or two for and against arguments in general, not in specific, because there's not enough time to like cover everything in depth. But as much as I can touch upon it so that you guys can read upon it in detail later in life. Cool. So one of the major part of economics that aligns with the idea of social justice is that it also aligns with the idea of environmentalism. A lot of a lot of debates that happen in the contemporary times also ensue that is economic growth and is climate change something that can happen on the same pedestal, which means that is it something which is true that you can also engage in massive industrialization and also have certain amount of climate protection along with it. This is the reason why there is extensive debate that ensues when Democratic Party in America pulled out the new Green New Deal. A lot of people thought that this is going to lead to extensive amount of individuals losing out on their jobs, or good industries such as fossil fuel industries will end up losing their jobs. So, or a lot of industries which are massively employing people are going to shut down. Or is it going to produce cars or like vehicles which are necessarily economic in nature for middle class and low income people to buy? So these are the kinds of ideologies, or these are the kinds of questions that usually ensue along the same lines. So it becomes kind of dicey for individuals to argue for it. So what you need to firstly do is to go ahead and read why economic growth and climate change is something that may or may not exist at once, which means that both of these things can happen. Is it necessary that for you need to prioritize? Why is it important for you to prioritize economic growth? Is it that you are prioritizing the growth, or like economic? The reason why economic growth is usually prioritized over climate change is to tell people that, look, sure, climate change is going to hurt a lot of people, but for India the immediate need is to not prevent what's going to happen to Mumbai 30 years down the line, but to lift poor who are already dying in a lot of slums. Like, since 30% of people, or 30-40% of people are already extensively poor in India, so their immediate priority is to engage in massive industrialization to pull those people out of poverty line so that can at least sustain their daily livelihoods. This at many times undermine the climate objectives of what climate change policies are. This at the same time might undermine the goals that Paris Convention has put forward to. Is this risk worth taking, or is this risk not worth taking? Is there another way around it? Are there similar kinds of questions that you are going to tackle when you read about climate change versus economic growth? Secondly, fuck, what is this shit? Just a sec. Just a sec. Yeah. So this meeting has less than 10 minutes left. So Abhyuday, please, bro, make another Zoom link, or I'm not sure like if this similar link will work again. Depends on you. Probably
Yeah,
we'll be
the
sending
same
the
link.
same thing.
Yeah, the same link will work. I'll just end the meeting and then the same link will work and they can rejoin. All of the people can rejoin.
Why
Totally.
don't you
We'll do.
move to Meet? It's much easier, na? No
No,
time
we
limit.
won't be able to record this session. No, the
Acha.
recording is
I'm already recording the session, so meet पे नहीं हो पाएगा.
yeah. So we'll move out in like 3-4 minutes. Before that, I'll like cover one of the smaller parts of this. Rescue mechanisms. So a lot of times there were economic crises that this world has faced. One of the most common has been 2008 economic crisis.
Tejas sir, I think you're not audible because of your Wi-Fi.
Along the same lines, why is it necessary? Why is it important? And what are sure that the companies who have actually went into bankruptcy or are becoming insolvent or are becoming non-performing assets need to be bailed out. So bailout becomes one of the common grounds of debates. Read the idea of what a too big to fall corporation looks like. Is it just about it's problematic for Google to become this big without getting broken down, or without getting technically split into other smaller forms of Google in itself? Bailing out a lot of companies has had a lot of moral hazards which translate into the idea when there were Lehman Brothers, which were basically some say was the cause of 2008 financial crisis. When they were being bailed out, there was a lot of public backlash, which translated into the Occupy the Wall Street protest in 2010, 2011. The problem that becomes here is that people think that a lot amount of public look, these reason why economic crisis happened was because Lehman Brothers became one of the banks who had thought that now, since I'm such a big bank, I won't fall because I have such integrated financial activities happening within my own country, which means that when these banks actually fall and when these banks actually suffer certain amount of economic recession, they trigger certain amount of chain reactions which cause other banks or other companies to fall into recession or fall into bankruptcy in itself, which means that causes a nationwide bankruptcy or nationwide financial crisis. When these banks or these companies which have risky behavior of borrowing without really acknowledging the economic growth of their own countries, of their own companies, which means that they usually cook up books to represent false accounts to continue borrowing, usually leads to these companies falling, which means in a nutshell that the risky behaviors that these companies have basically portrayed has led to them falling. When people see that their hard earned public money or hard earned tax money is now being fed back to these companies, when these companies in the first place are extensively risky, they are already promoting the idea of risky behaviors within these countries. This is the amount of moral hazard that you need to address within this debate. So one of the good books or one of the good chapters that I would really suggest on reading moral hazards regarding to it is that there is, I think, a J. Sandel is one of the person who have written a book called Justice, and takes is a Harvard professor who takes a course called Justice, like the moral questions of what justice is supposed to be. So I think page 13, 14, and 15 talks about bailout and its moral implications. Is it something which is technically correct, technically not correct? What are the economic downfalls if you cause companies such as Lehman Brothers to collapse? What are the economic outcomes that you're going to see? What are the likelihood of economic repercussions that you're going to see with regards to Europe 2020 bailout? Because a lot of countries within Europe are actually falling out of place because there's not like because coronavirus pandemic has caused them to shut down their operations. Is it good for these companies to come back into business because these companies are already doing extensive amount of climate change, extensive amount of climate damage? What is it that you should do? What is it that you should not do? These are the things that are open to question on your part. Read about them, like get to know about them in detail as much as you want. Thirdly, one of the common debates that we see are around the ideas of nationalization. So the debates that you will usually see is nationalization of space industry, nationalization of railways, nationalization of extensively big tech industries, and things along the same lines. Wait, yeah, and things along the same lines. So what you really need to understand within this debate is what is the metric that you nationalize certain sector, or what is the metric that you don't nationalize a certain sector. What is the need, or what is the metric that you nationalize a certain sector, and what is the metric that you don't nationalize a certain sector. What are the metrics that you nationalize a certain sector, and what are the metrics that you don't nationalize a certain sector. So
Right. So I'm ending the meeting because there's only about a minute or so left. Please rejoin the same link if possible. Like the same link within 2 minutes.